I'm sure to get a brain.
Uh-huh.
The night.
Hello and welcome.
Religious nerdiness is so extreme it's actually dangerous.
We are not the Scarecrow Ministries, demonstrating daily the truth claims of Christianity.
Christianity made me talk like an idiot.
Changing minds, hearts, and homes with the love of Christ.
No wonder some atheists just think the whole of religion is ludicrous.
We are not the Scarecrow.
Mom, where's Timmy?
He's gone to be with the Lord.
He's dead?
No, silly. He and his family have moved to Bubble Creek Canyon.
Do you dream of a day when you can drive to work without being forced to look at unchristian billboards and bumper stickers? When you can turn on the radio without hearing the electric guitar or some other horrible instrument of the devil? When you don't have to interact with bozos who have the audacity to disagree with you? Well, at Bubble Creek Canyon, your dreams can come true. Hello, or as we like to say at Bubble Creek Canyon, heaven out. Bubble Creek Canyon is an isolated community nestled in 3,500 acres of magnificent and desirable real estate. Best of all, it's 100% heathen-free. That's right, and you'll think it's the next best thing to heaven. At Bubble Creek Canyon, we use an elaborate screening process to ensure that our residents completely agree with our doctrine. No ifs, ands, or Buddhists. We're a heavily gated community with fantastic facilities, breathtaking sightlines, and Christianized amenities. We have a Christian shoe store, a Christian t-shirt store, a Christian underwear store, a Christian bank, Christian grocery, Christian car dealership, Christian pet store, Christian liquor store, and a Christian tattoo parlor. Temporary, of course. We have a nationally recognized school district and only one textbook. And each home comes equipped with built-in Christian signage. Just try to pull this off the wall. With our combination cable and internet package, you'll have access to ESPN, My Heavenly Space, GodTunes, Godopedia, GodGold, GodBay, Godcast, and The Sopranos. We've added a new feature this year. Around the holidays, special sensors in the streetlights detect non-nativity ornamentation and act quickly to eliminate these unsightly eyesores. Bubble Creek Canyon. If God wasn't omnipresent, he'd probably live here.
You know, it's funny, but it's true. Up until just a few years ago, the United States was kind of like Bubble Creek Canyon. No matter where you lived near somebody that thought like you, kind of looked like you, had the same basic beliefs as you. They may not have gone to the exact same church. They may not have had the exact same denomination. But when you said things like God or Jesus or the Bible or sin, they knew what you meant. So it was almost like we lived in a bubble here in the United States. Well, if you haven't noticed, things have changed. All of a sudden, we no longer live in a bubble. It's just completely different now than it was then. And when you say God, they might think something totally different. It's just not the same anymore. Your very neighbor might be someone who doesn't even believe, never heard the word sin in their life, doesn't know what it is. Heaven has a totally different meaning to them. And so we no longer live in that bubble. So it's important that we have a good understanding of this, because the Great Commission has not changed. Jesus said we are to go into the world and make disciples of all the nations. The only change is that we no longer have to go into all the world, because they've all come here and they're still coming here. And so it's no longer that you have to go to outer Mongolia. Your very next door neighbor might be someone who has a completely different view of heaven or God. We used to, if anybody remembers the evangelism explosion thing they did in the 80s, you go to someone's house and you knock on the door and you say, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? And there was a set of answers that you'd probably get. Well, that's no longer true. You might have someone say, well, there's no such thing as heaven. Or, no, I'm going to be reincarnated, so I don't have to worry about that. And so on. Evangelism explosion will no longer work here in the United States because things are just so different than they were. So the Great Commission still applies, but it's up to us to change to make sure that we meet it. So we need 3 things in order to make this happen. The first thing we need is, of course, confidence in our own belief system. We have to be so confident that we have the truth that we can walk up to the most ardent atheist and ask them questions about Jesus, or let them tell us about their faith. And I do say faith because they do have one even if they don't admit it. But we have to be so confident that when they come at us with their venom sometimes, that we can still love them. So we must have confidence that what we believe is true. The second thing we must have is an understanding of what they believe. As I just mentioned a minute ago, you can no longer walk up to someone and say, hey, are you going to heaven? Do you know if you died tonight, are you going to heaven? They might be like, what are you talking about? I'm not a sinner. Of course I'm going to heaven. Or, I believe in many gods. Which God are you talking about? See, it's just so different. So we must, it used to be that maybe we were here and they were here. Well, now they're like way over here, and we have to get them at least somewhat close so that we're using the same language. Which brings me to the third point. We must have love and compassion for all people because they don't believe the same as we do, and they may never. We can't just look at people at like our next door neighbor. I'm gonna witness to them and I'm gonna get them saved, darn it, and they're gonna get saved if it kills me. You know what? That person may never come to Christ. We have to be willing to love them and have compassion even if they never agree with us. Jesus said the mark of a Christian is love. And I do believe that the way things are going in our country, words are no longer going to work. It really has to be the love in our hearts towards other people that are going to make them see that Christianity is different. Now, they already know Christianity is different in some ways, and that's why Christianity is so darn persecuted, because they know that Christians are different, but there's so many hypocrites out there. So it is going to be that love and that compassion that we show to people that will help them to know that we really are different and that we really do care about them, not just about getting them saved. So this is the 4th week of a 4-week series working on number 1 and 2 up there. Well, I guess up there. I'm looking back here. I can help you, hopefully, get some confidence in your faith and help you understand their beliefs so that when you talk to a Mormon, you at least have an idea of why when you say God, they think something different than you. Or when you talk to a Muslim, why they think heaven is something different than what you think. So I can help you with that. So week 1 we discussed, does God exist? Because that is the foundation of our faith, is if we have to understand and believe that there is a God and that He really does exist, and when other people talk about their various versions of God, we have to make sure that they are clear what we are talking about. So we want to have our own confidence in our own faith. So week 1 we discussed, does God exist? And we know that God is not physical. So there is no physical evidence to prove there is a God, but we use logic and reason to reason and rationalize why there must be a God. And that logic and that reason is something that even the most vocal atheist cannot deny without sawing off the very branch he's sitting on. And we have to be just that sure about it. So I hope that week 1 we did that. We convinced you beyond a reasonable doubt that our God, the God that we believe in, does exist. In week 2, we talked about, is the resurrection true? Did Jesus really live? Did he die? And did he rise from the dead? And I mentioned that we don't even need the Bible to prove that because it's a historical fact. We have historical evidence to prove that Jesus lived and died and rose from the dead. And if somebody doesn't believe the Bible, then don't bother using it to prove this point, because you don't need to. That evidence is given to us in history itself. However, I don't discount the Bible in any way, shape, or form, because in week 3 we talked about, is the Bible true? And here's the thing, history, God is good because he gave us both. He gave us all sorts of evidence over here, historical evidence, archaeological evidence, biological evidence, anthropological evidence, molecular evidence. There is the fossil record. There's evidence everywhere we look for Christianity, totally outside of the Bible. So from the world itself, from nature and from all the evidence, we can see the what, the when, the where, and the who. But it's the Bible that tells us the why. Why did God do any of this? Why did God create the earth? Why did God send his Son to save us? Why did we need saving in the first place? Without the Word of God, we would not know the why. We would not be able to understand that God wants a personal relationship. Sure, we would know that there is a God out there. We'd understand that Jesus came and died on the cross and rose from the dead, and we'd maybe have some of the written things of what Jesus said, but we wouldn't have a real clear picture of why God did it. So God is good. He gave us tons and tons of evidence about the Bible itself, the biggest one being fulfilled prophecy. No other book in history has fulfilled prophecy like the Bible does. Other books might have 1 or 2 fulfilled prophecies and then a whole bunch of false ones. No false prophecies here. Some unfulfilled ones, yes, but no false prophecies at all. So the Bible is unique in so many ways. And so we talked about in week 3, and I think we proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the Bible is true. So in week 4, we are going to talk about, is Christianity truly the only way to heaven? Because this is the sticking point for Christians and everybody else. This is why Christianity is beginning to be more and more persecuted in the United States. Right now, it's the most persecuted religion over in Europe and Asia and Africa, and it's coming here, because Christianity is different. So we have to understand, is it the only way, and why is that true? And that's what we're going to talk about this week. So I want to say that there is more evidence to support, before I even get to it, there is more evidence to support Christianity than any other religion. And the fulfilled prophecy is one of the biggest things that skeptics simply cannot deny. So as we begin week 4 here, I just recapped weeks 1 through 3, but as we begin week 4, let's go ahead and stand, and we're going to go to the book of John, chapter 14, and I'm going to start in verse 1, and I have it up there yet. So it says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me." Now this is Jesus talking to his disciples. They're in the upper room. They've just had the Last Supper. Jesus knows he's heading to the cross. The disciples are just confused and scared and sad and everything else. So Jesus is giving them words of encouragement. So he says, "Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you will be also. And you know the way where I am going." And then Thomas says, "Well, Lord, we do not know the way where you're going. How do we know the way?" And this is the key verse here. Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." Amen. Let's go ahead and pray real quick. Lord, I just thank you that you have given us all this evidence, Lord, so that we don't have to doubt. we can come to you in confidence, and we don't have to know just about you, Lord, but we can actually know you. Lord, I pray that all of these words for the last 4 weeks and beyond, Father, and going forward, that every last one of them just fills our hearts with joy and peace and comfort and, Lord, confidence that we can go out into the world knowing that no matter what happens, that we have the truth and that you are going to help us to disseminate this truth to the world one way or another. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, so this week we're talking about Christianity itself. Is it true in comparison to all the other religions out there? Now there's thousands and thousands of different religions and branches of religions and denominations, and there's just so many. So it's like, how do you sort that all out? Well, there's 2 ways we can sort this out. The first way is to sort it out by gods or by deities. There's really only 3. You either believe in many gods, which is like Hinduism, and I put Mormonism in there, and I'll explain a little bit more, or Taoism, beliefs like that. They believe in many, many gods. You've heard of polytheism. Well, these are polytheistic religions. Or there's religions that believe in only one God, and we're talking about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They believe in one God. And then there are religions, and yes, they are religions, that believe in no God at all. And that would be like atheism and Buddhism. But actually a better way to sort through the different religions is to organize them by worldview. And I'll explain what worldview is in here in just a minute. But if you sort out religions by worldview, you get a whole different picture, because by worldview, religions that are salvation in faith, by faith alone, in other words, you cannot earn it, Christianity is all by itself. Biblical Christianity. There's a lot of offshoots and cults that have made changes. So when I say Christianity from this point on, I mean the biblical kind of Christianity that we believe. Okay, so religions or belief systems, and I might use religions and belief systems interchangeably, okay? So just know that I mean the same thing. But belief systems that believe you cannot earn your salvation, Christianity is it. You cannot earn it. It must be given to you by the grace of God Himself. Otherwise, there are religions that believe that you can have salvation by your various works, and that's nearly every other religion out there. You can lump them all, and I would say every single religion, except for atheism, which stands alone, no salvation at all. Atheism is the most hopeless belief system, because there's absolutely nothing to look forward to. There is no salvation. When you die, you turn into a pile of dirt. So that's atheism. So they stand alone as well, but not for a good reason. So religions that are salvation by faith, biblical Christianity. Everybody else, salvation by works. And this is probably the best way to sort religions out, because now biblical Christianity stands all by itself. So let's talk about what I mean by a worldview. Every one of us has a worldview, whether you realize it or not. A worldview is nothing more than the lens through which you see the world. All of your past experiences, the way you were taught, your education, your presuppositions, all the things you've heard, all the things you've decided you believe or don't believe, everything comes into play, and we're not even aware sometimes of our worldview. It just happens. We see a billboard that says, "Have a nice day." Well, that means a million things to a million different people. Have a nice day for me might be going out and doing drugs, and that's a nice day. Have a nice day for someone else might be being able to stay in bed all day. You see, because we all have our own idea of what's great and what's not. And so a worldview, though, the worldview that you have should match reality as closely as possible. So what we're going to look at next is a bunch of different religions or belief systems, and we're going to analyze how closely to reality do these belief systems come. Because I am going to submit to you that only Christianity matches reality as closely as possible. Christianity can answer the basic questions that everybody asks at some point in their life. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do while I'm here? And where am I going? Most religions simply cannot answer these questions, or they cannot answer them in a satisfying way that matches with real reality. So I submit that Christianity is the only one, the only worldview that matches reality the closest. So let's talk about a few of them. Go ahead and go to the first one. Atheism. I went ahead and put that one first because atheism is no God at all. Atheists believe that science has replaced God. I have a couple, 3 different atheists in my family. I had a conversation with my sister, and I mentioned that I had become a Christian. This was way back when, early days when I had just become a Christian, and she said, "Oh, Narita, we don't need God, we have science." Science has become her God. She doesn't realize that. That's become her worldview. But science has become her God. Many scientists and the intelligentsia of our country, the elite people who think that they are way smarter than we are, and by the way, they think that we are all a bunch of idiots. We're stupid, we're ignorant, we're backwards, and we need religion as a crutch. This is what they believe, and they believe that they have the truth. But we're going to discover if they have the truth or not. So they believe that science has replaced God, that evolution answers all of the questions, at least it answers where did we come from. Now, they believe that the survival of the fittest and all that, and yet they still cannot answer where did we actually come from, the arrival of the fittest. So they still have some questions to answer yet, but they say that evolution is true and science is true and we don't need God anymore. They believe in absolute naturalism, materialism. The material world is all there is. You have to be able to taste it, touch it, smell it, see it, or feel it. Did I say that one? Or hear it. If you can't taste it or touch it or any of the 5 senses, then it's not real. That's what they believe. And they also believe that they can be good without God, which is true. They can be good without God. But let's go ahead and go to the questions for atheists. The questions that we need to ask atheists is, if the material world is all that there is, how do they explain consciousness, ideas, emotions, the laws of logic? None of these things can be touched. I can't pull a thought out of my head and hold it in my hand. I can type it up, print it out, and hold it in my hand, but it starts out in here, and there's no substance to it. How do they explain consciousness? They cannot explain how we have consciousness. They can't explain the ideas that we come up with and we write this beautiful poetry and stuff. They can't explain the laws of logic, things like that. So atheism is having to steal from Christianity in order to complete their worldview of materialism. In the lab, they might be able to say, oh, that's all we have is what I can touch. I can come touch this chair, so that's real. But they have to actually go home and live in the real world where they have ideas and they have to think of things. So what they say they believe and what they actually believe are in conflict with each other. And the same thing with their definition of good. Sure, they can be good without God, but as I mentioned in week 1, where are they getting their definition of good if there is no ultimate moral standard, God? So good can mean something totally different. Good to a pedophile means something totally different than good to me and you, yes? It's crazy. So they are saying things that do not actually fit reality. So although atheists believe that they're the smartest people in the world, their worldview is incomplete unless they steal from Christianity to bring it into their worldview to make it complete. So atheism, I think it's a no-go. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. I went to Buddhism next because Buddhism, the Buddhists also believe there is no God. Buddha is not actually a God. Buddha was the enlightened one. Buddhism was founded somewhere in this like 600, 500 BC by Siddhartha Gautama, who was a rich man, but he was very disillusioned with life, and one day he sat down under a tree and discovered the truth. And the truth was that all suffering comes from your desires, which is technically not true. Some of our suffering comes from other people. So his premise is wrong in the first place. But the premise of Buddhism is that all suffering comes from desire. Therefore, if we eliminate desire, we can eliminate suffering, and we can reach enlightenment, nirvana. Nirvana is like the ultimate state of well-being, and we can become a Buddha, the enlightened one. So this is, and they have the Four Noble Truths, of which one of them is that all your suffering comes from your desires. And if you could just get rid of those, then you could become enlightened too. And they follow the Eightfold Path, which is a set of moral things that they're supposed to do. So they have to work to get to nirvana. But let's go ahead and go to the, oh, he's already got, have you got the questions up there? Did I miss it? There's no, I must have missed a page. Well, questions for Buddhists. Just give them to you. The desire to get rid of all desires is a desire, is it not? And the desire to reach nirvana is a desire, is it not? Therefore, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you can never reach nirvana, because you can't get rid of the desire to get rid of all your desires. It's a self-contradiction. Buddhism simply does not match the real world. And it's impossible to get rid of desire anyway. God has put that in our hearts. And ask anybody. You know, we have desires for things which are not, it's not a bad thing. But you'll find Buddhists just working so hard, and they believe in reincarnation. If they didn't get it in this life, they can go through 100,000 more lives until they finally get it. But it's never going to happen, because desire, well, there's at least one desire all the time. And so it's a failure. All right, I went to Hinduism next. Now we're going to the other end of the spectrum. Hinduism started probably around 1500 BC. There is no actual founder of Hinduism, but Hindus believe that there are many, many, many gods, and you are welcome to bring your God along and add him into the pantheon. Bring the holy books from your God, and you can worship him too. They're more than happy, and they add new gods all the time, and they add new books all the time. Hindus have a bunch of really complicated rituals and things that they do to try to placate and make these gods happy. I worked with a Hindu woman at one of my contracts, and she tried to explain it to me, and it's like, she could hardly explain it herself. It is so very complicated. But Hinduism is such a depressing religion or belief system, because they firmly believe that the world is eternal and cyclical, and everything is just a continuous cycle, and you end up in this cycle of reincarnation. And if you did something bad in this life, you're going to be reincarnated in your next life, and you've got to pay for it in your next life, and then still try to be good, because eventually you're going to be absorbed into the great Brahman, which is not really a god, but sort of kind of a god, but not really a mind, not really a person. They can't really describe what the great Brahman is. So you go through reincarnation over and over and over, and every little mistake you make in this life, you get stuck. You're stuck in this wheel of suffering over and over. And this is why, if you've ever read anything about Mother Teresa, when she went to the slums of Calcutta to try to help these poor, starving babies and young children and mothers and things, the other Indians, the Hindus, would not help. And they said that if they did help, it would mess up that person's karma. So if this person did something bad in their last life, they're suffering for it now. And if I interfere right now and help them, then they've got to get reincarnated and pay for it in their next life. So the Hindus will not help each other, because they believe that they're interfering in that person's wheel You know, I can't help you because you have to pay for it. And so this is why they do not give generously. A devout Hindu will not help their neighbor because they believe their neighbor has to pay their own price, or they'll just get stuck in the wheel again and again and again. So the questions I do have questions for Hindus. Go ahead and go to that one. The questions for Hindus is, science is proving that the world is not eternal. So how do Hindus answer that? Because the evidence for the Big Bang is pretty strong. The world is not eternal and cyclical like they're thinking. But also, all of these gods, they have no evidence at all for all of these gods, not one shred, except for something somebody said and something somebody wrote. There's no other evidence at all for any of these gods. None of them are holy, none of them are infinite or eternal. They're just kind of out there, and they can manifest, and they're not really personal like our God. They have no evidence for any of these. They have no evidence either for reincarnation. We hear stories every once in a while of some young child who remembered a past life, and oh, it's so exciting. But there's no evidence for any of this. And this wheel of suffering, there's no evidence. So the Hindus, what they believe in their belief system or their religion does not match reality at all. So it's a very depressing and hopeless belief system, because they simply we can never be perfect. We just can't, and so they're never going to get absorbed into the great Brahman. It's just awful. But when you're talking to a Hindu, you have to understand that when you say God, they're going to say, which one? And then when you say heaven, they're going to say reincarnation. They just don't believe the same as we do. We need to understand what they believe and get them to where they understand what we're saying, so that we can give them some hope. And even if they never accept it, we still love them anyway. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, I called Mormonism, I get grief for this, and many do, because the Mormons technically believe in the same God we do. They're technically a Christian religion. They're actually more of a cult, which a cult is not like a bad thing. I'm talking about the occult. But a cult is like an offshoot of the Orthodox religion that the Bible prescribes. So the Mormons, they believe, when you say God, they believe that God was once a man who lived on another planet, and he followed the Mormon practices so well that he became a god and got to rule our planet. They used to teach that this God lived somewhere in the Pleiades. But see, they had to change that. Once we started to understand more about astronomy, they had to go and change that, because now it seems silly. So that's one of our questions, is how many changes? They've had 3,900 changes to the Book of Mormon. 3,900, which have changed actual doctrine. Yes, the Bible has had some changes. No doctrine has ever changed. The doctrines of the biblical Christianity have never changed, not one iota. They've had 3,900 changes. So they believe that God was once a real man who lived on another planet. He followed Mormonism so closely that he became a god himself. And Jesus died on the cross, but that's not enough. You have to do the works of Mormonism, but if you do, you too can become a god and have a wife. And this is why I think, well, what about the women who follow it? Well, I guess maybe you could have a husband, but they really only talk about the men. So you can have your own planet with your own wife, and you can raise up your own spirit children and have your own planet to rule. They don't teach you this right out of the gate, because nobody in their right mind would believe this. But they start out with very Christian doctrine. But by the time you get done with the Mormonism, you can be a god and have your own planet to rule with your own spirit children. Jesus died on the cross, but I don't know why he bothered, because you have to follow all these Mormon rules and practices if you can have any hope at all of becoming a god and having your own planet to rule. So, the questions for Mormonism. If you are good enough and do all the right practices and everything, and you can become a god and have your own planet, why didn't Jesus and the Holy Spirit get their own planet to rule? And they had this other person, Moroni, or something like that. Moroni is mentioned in the Book of Mormon. He didn't get a planet to rule either. Why not? Okay, and then explain to me all the changes. The Book of Mormon is claimed to be from God himself, and yet it has had so many changes that have changed doctrine, that the Mormons have to explain that. If they can't explain where all these changes came from and why, and part of it is because they've had false prophecies. And so they've had to adjust the doctrine a little bit to fix for the false prophecy. So Mormonism does not match reality. It doesn't make sense, the logic of it. When you start to put it together, where's the evidence that you're going to become a god and live on another planet? Show me some evidence here. There isn't any. So Mormonism as a belief system does not match reality. I have Jehovah's Witnesses up there just real briefly. Go ahead and go to that one. Jehovah's Witness, I'm only going to mention them briefly. They're not like the Mormons at all, but they're similar in the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses is full of false prophecies. They claim the world was coming to an end and Jesus was coming back in 1914, and then he didn't come back, and then they had to adjust all their Watchtower literature, and then they said that there was some number, and now they insist that the fall of Judah, which was in 586 BC, was actually in 609. And they have to stick to it because the way they did their numbers in their books and their literature, now they're stuck. Even though historically we know that Jerusalem or the whole country of Judah fell in 586 BC and got taken off to the Babylonians. So it's stuff like this. The Jehovah's Witnesses deny the Trinity. They deny that Jesus was a God. They deny that he died on the cross. They deny all of that. And then they have changes galore to their Watchtower literature. So Jehovah's Witness also does not match reality, and they haven't got any evidence, and they've got to explain all these false prophecies and all these changes. Okay, Islam. This is the last one, and to me probably the most important, because the Muslim problem in America is going to be growing. As more and more Muslims move here, it's not that they're coming here, especially if they're coming here legally, it's what they believe. So Islam means submit. It was founded in the 7th century by Muhammad, who claims that the angel Gabriel came and delivered to him the Quran, the book which was delivered to him over a period of about 23 years, and it came from Allah himself. They deny the Trinity completely. So Allah is it, one God, and in fact one of their things is there is one God, Allah, and his prophet is Muhammad. And so they believe that Muhammad was the last and greatest prophet, but they do believe that Jesus was good and everything. They deny the crucifixion. They say that a substitute died on the cross. They have no evidence for this, by the way, but Muhammad just didn't want Jesus to have died on the cross, so Muhammad wrote. And I say Muhammad wrote because something happened to Muhammad for sure. In order for Islam to be where it is today, something happened to Muhammad. But after a while, if you ever read the history of it, it became what Muhammad wanted. The Quran, as the Quran goes on, it became what Muhammad wanted. Muhammad wanted more wives, so suddenly he had a revelation. He was going to have more wives. He could have more wives. He wanted to marry his adopted son's wife, so suddenly he had a revelation from God that it was okay for him to marry his adopted son. The Quran is filled with this kind of thing. Not only that, but the people, even they deny the crucifixion altogether, but Islam also, you must keep the 5 pillars of Islam, which is the Shahada, there is one God, Allah, and you have to say this every day or 5 times a day, and his prophet is Muhammad. You have to do the prayer 5 times a day, you have to give alms, you have to do the fasting during Ramadan, and at least once in your lifetime you must go to Mecca and do the pilgrimage. And if you've ever watched a video on the people doing this pilgrimage, it is the weirdest, silliest thing that I've ever seen. And many Muslims who become Christians when they go do that pilgrimage, because the silly things that they make them do during this Hajj, it's so silly that a regular thinking human being has trouble doing it. Okay? So the questions we have, oh yeah, and there's no guarantee, even if you keep the 5 pillars of Islam, there is no guarantee of paradise unless you become a martyr for the faith. You kill yourself doing the jihad. Only then, the holy war against the infidels, only then can you be guaranteed to get to paradise, where you get your 72 virgins and whatever else you might get there. Okay, but they totally deny all the stuff in Christianity, even though there's absolutely no evidence for what they say in the Quran. I should mention that they also follow the hadiths. The hadiths were a bunch of books written by various Muslims about 100 years after Muhammad lived. And they say that the hadiths, unless they contradict the Quran, are just as authoritative. So they follow the Quran and the hadiths, and they must complete the 5 pillars of Islam. The scary part is, anybody who does not convert to Islam is an infidel and may be killed any which way they want to kill you. They also teach in the Quran, because I've read the Quran, that they can lie to infidels and they can trick infidels. So they come here and they tell us that they are a religion of peace. As soon as there's enough of them here, they will rise up and they will attempt to establish a caliphate, or basically claim this country as their own, and they will begin killing infidels. And I guarantee you that this is going to happen. It's happening in England, it's happening in Germany, in Sweden. They're beginning to start to rise up because they've got enough of them. And that's what they do. They lie because you are an infidel and they don't care about you. And if you don't convert, they will kill you. That's this religion of peace that they say. However, if you can talk to a Muslim, and I'd say be very careful when you talk to a Muslim, but if you make friends with someone who is a Muslim and you feel comfortable talking to them, there are some questions you can ask them, because the Quran contradicts itself many, many times. And the Quran says that the Torah and the Gospel, the Old Testament and the New Testament, came down from Allah. Now, Muslims will say it's corrupted. Well, it wasn't corrupted in Muhammad's time, because the Quran says that Allah gave us the Torah and the Gospel. And we know from our own biblical manuscripts that we have the same Bible today that he had back in the 600s AD. So if God gave the Torah and the Gospel, then how can Muslims say that it's corrupted? Not only that, but the Quran says that Christians are supposed to do what the Gospel says. The Christians are supposed to look to the Gospel. The Jews are supposed to look to the Torah, and the Christians are supposed to look to the Gospel. Therefore, if the Christians are supposed to look to the Gospel, if the Quran is true, then Islam is false. Because the Gospel says, I am the way, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come to the Father except through me. If the Quran itself tells us to obey the Gospel, and the Gospel says that Jesus is the only way, then Islam is false. And if the Quran is false, then of course Islam is false. So no matter how you slice it, Islam is false. Don't say this to a Muslim unless you're really comfortable. And don't insult Muhammad, because they get very angry about that. But pray for the Muslims. I hear, in fact, Fox News just had an article about the church in Iran. They said the mosques are nearly empty because the chaos and everything going on, they can't hear the call to prayer. And the church in Iran is growing just huge, and it's mostly run by women. The women know that if they get caught, they will be raped, and they will be tortured, and they will be killed. But they don't care, because Jesus appeared to them. We can't get the gospel in, so Jesus appeared to them anyway. When God wants it in there, God's going to get it in there. So pray for the church in Iran, because something is happening over in the Middle East right now that the Muslims simply can't explain or deny. So in the end, go ahead and go to the very last slide. The gospel says, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man can come to the Father except by me. Jesus said it, he told us he was going to do it, and then he went ahead and he did it. He died on the cross and he rose from the dead. He gave us evidence and he proved it. No other religion has given the evidence and proved it. Christianity is the only one that matches reality. Therefore, we can have confidence that what we have is the truth, that Jesus really is the only way to heaven, and you can walk out those doors knowing that you are walking in the truth. And as you see people and pray for them, pray that they too can one day walk in that same truth. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. And for more great resources, be sure to check out our website at www.notthescarecrow.com. If you'd like to contact Dr. Sieffert, you can send an email to scarecrow@notthescarecrow.com. Or if you'd like, you can write us at P.O. Box 8933, Greenville, Texas 75404. May God be with you in mind, heart, and soul.